Australia is unique, and as a nation, we would benefit by accepting the knowledge from our First Peoples that enabled us to survive in such diverse environments. Our ancestors respected the land and listened to what was whispered. The footprints they left on the land were small. The land repaid them by providing them with all they needed. They never felt the need to take more than their share. They were never greedy. They never exploited the land until it hemorrhaged. A scarred landscape, poisonous rivers, a polluted atmosphere, and toxic wastelands were not the legacies left by our ancestors.
If Australia could accept the fact that Aboriginal people had a viable culture and economy at the contact period, Australia would be able to accept its own history of that contact period and then embrace all the knowledge that Aboriginal people over 120,000 years would be able to share. And that knowledge also considers how to farm on a continent with low moisture levels and low soil fertility. And if we were able to do that, we would be protecting our continent, our land, loving Mother Earth.
Aboriginal worldviews benefit the university by enriching our connection to our own practices, giving us access to complex systems of understanding which have existed within this continent for thousands of generations. As we strive to enhance and diversify our respective fields, it's the knowledges that have always existed within the countries upon which we work that offer us renewed insights and a deeper and more sophisticated understanding of who we all are.
We, as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers and academics, know that to speak back to the dominant norms, we must know the knower and understand the ways in which non-Indigenous Australia has represented our shared histories, our lived experiences, and us as Indigenous peoples over time. It is only then that we can flip the narrative. Further to this, there is the need for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander worldviews, our stories and our lived experiences to be told and shared using authentic voice, because otherwise the corpus is not complete.
As a young Indigenous professional, this year's Namarashana theme resonates with me by creating a sense of urgency and agency for not only myself, but also for my people, my culture, and our shared knowledge. You do not become the oldest living culture in the world by accident, and I think Australia is just starting to realise this. The next step from this, however, is giving Indigenous people a platform to provide this knowledge. With our connection and passion to this land, I think now is the time, more than ever, for us as a culture to help save Australia's environmental and social unravelling.
Michael Shawn's work is vital and resonates with me because it reinforces Aboriginal ways of knowing, doing and being. His focus on convincing the colonial mind of the validity and power of our knowledge is something which also resonates with the work of Morat Barak and colleagues' work outside of the science disciplines. Since British invasion, imported ways of managing the land and settling the continent continue to have violent and devastating effects on our people and country. We've been here for over 80,000 years, and the way Michael Shawn's work embeds the Aboriginal worldview and relationship with country into mainstream Australia will continue to benefit not just our community, but the lives and livelihoods of everyone.
Hello everybody, my name is Dave Wandin and I'm an elder of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Tribal Land Council, and I'm speaking to you here today from Corranderk Mission Station, who some of you may be aware of, the place of the first land rights held in this country. As I said, I'm an elder of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Land Council. I'm also director and chairperson of Wandoo Estate, who holds responsibility for Corranderk. I am speaking from the land of my ancestors, and I pay my respects to my ancestors and my elders, both past and present. I pay my respects to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are with us today, their ancestors and their elders, both past, present and emerging. I pay my respect to all Indigenous people, wherever you may be, and that includes people who are not Aboriginal but call Australia home. It's important to remember that it is not just Aboriginal land anymore. It is a country that we share with many, many people. And we welcome people onto country who actually recognise that it is not their home, that it has been managed and looked after for many thousands of years by a particular race of people. And there are laws of the land which must be obeyed if we are going to make this country as sustainable as what it was at the time of colonisation. We need to actually walk country together. That way we can heal country together. And once we can heal country together, we heal ourselves as people. And the way to do that is to go through a welcome to country. Now, I don't speak language. My specialty as an elder is in actual land management, caring for the birds, the trees, the reptiles, the insects, the soil, the water, the air. So you won't hear my welcoming language because I can't speak it. I only know 3 words. But hopefully, for everybody else who's listening in today, that you will remember these 3 words. That if you are on Wurundjeri country, that you will walk outside and repeat after me. Waminjika, Wurundjeri, Biak, and welcome yourself onto country when you leave your home. And of course that applies for wherever else you are in country. If you can learn just the word of welcome when you walk out your front door, you are actually on someone else's territory. And learn that language and repeat that to yourselves. That is paying respect to country. That's the initial thing, because the country is what supports us. But the country didn't just occur, it was created. And I pay my respects to our creator spirit, which is Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle, represented by the wedge-tailed eagle. And Bunjil gave Wurundjeri people first law of this land. He gave us also many other laws that carry on down from that. But the most important thing to remember, that first law, L-O-R-E, we must respect our mother. As we respect our physical mother who raises us when we are children, and as we grow older, and she grows older, we return the favour and we care for her. But what people don't remember is we must also care for the spirit of our mother. And the spirit of our mother is the land, the country, that Bunjil gave us responsibility, the moral responsibility, the cultural responsibility to care for. And if we can't look after the spirit of our mother just as we would our physical mother, we call it Mother Earth today, I call it nature. Some people call it Naam, I call it Biak. If we can't remember to look after the land that we work, play, gather resources from, to understand and respect the intricacies of what makes our country so great, so diverse, then we lose ourselves. We lose ourselves in our own humanity. We must pay respects to our mother. If we could all follow in this footstep, no matter where you live, no matter what country you're from, wherever you have settled to make your home, you must understand the country. It is only by caring for country that we can actually make this country ready for our next generations. This has been going on for 70,000 years minimum, scientifically, as we know. I know from my ancestors' stories that it's been much longer. It is very important to remember that every time you walk out, every time you dig a hole, every time you drive on the road, you are actually either helping country or you're hurting country. So when you hear the rest of this forum that you're going to be listening to, just think about it. Every step you make, every breath you take, it can make a difference. Every time you drop a little bit of rubbish, you're not only making it look ugly, but you are hurting. Now, Aboriginal people have always used the resources of the land, not just for themselves. We have a responsibility, as I said before, as a land manager, to care for the water, to care for the land, to care for the worms, and even the mushrooms, and all the ants and the spiders and the snakes and all the things that we don't actually really think about. That's just on the ground. And then we start caring for the plants, and the plants, what they support. And it's about understanding those intricacies, not only through ancient knowledge, but by combining scientific knowledge. That's what I call walking country together. There's no one way. There's no wrong way. There is only by working together and sharing what we have, sharing our knowledge to walk country, to heal country, so we can heal ourselves as people. Waminjika, Wurundjeri, Biak. Welcome to Wurundjeri country.
Thank you, Uncle Dave, as always, for your warm and generous welcome to country. I'm Associate Professor Sana Nakata, a Torres Strait Islander and Associate Dean Indigenous in the Faculty of Arts. It's been my privilege to receive welcomes from Uncle Dave on other occasions, and I am always struck by the way in which he reminds us all of our responsibilities to country and to one another as we walk together on country. It is such a pleasure to hear his welcome for this event from the historically significant site of Corranderk. It is now my pleasure to acknowledge you, our audience, and to thank you for joining us for the 2020 Naarm Oration. Naarm refers to the country of the Melbourne region. It is the land of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nations. Some of you joining us are students and colleagues of the University of Melbourne, which has campuses located here on Naarm. Many more of you are watching from across the regions of the other Kulin nations that surround it, and you may well be joining us from other parts of this continent and countries around the world. Wherever you are joining us from, I ask you to take a moment to acknowledge the country you are on and its elders, past and present. I acknowledge the knowledge they hold, the knowledge they share, and the knowledge they have practiced for millennia upon this earth. To all First Nations peoples around the world who are joining us for this year's oration, thank you and welcome. Now, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne, Professor Duncan Maskell, shares with us the significance of the Naarm Oration and the importance of Indigenous focused perspectives and research to the University of Melbourne.
Thank you, Sana, for your introduction. Thank you also to Uncle Dave for your generous welcome to country. I want to acknowledge Uncle Dave and all the other elders of the peoples who are the traditional owners of the lands on which the University of Melbourne stands. They are the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong, the Dja Dja Wurrung and the Yorta Yorta peoples. I pay my respects to all the Indigenous elders of this country, past, present and emerging, and to all Indigenous people viewing this 2020 Naarm Oration, whether you be in Australia or anywhere around the world. I'm speaking to you today from the University's Parkville campus, in front of the River Red Gums, which predate European colonisation of this country. These majestic trees connect us in a physical way to the Wurundjeri people who have walked and cared for this land for more than 60,000 years. It is my pleasure to be here participating in the opening of this year's Naarm Oration from a place surrounded by the whispers and songs of the custodians of this land. The Naarm Oration is a key event in the life of the university. It has taken place annually since 2009, giving a voice to important Indigenous elders and thinkers from around the world, enriching discussion of possible futures for Indigenous people. The oration expresses the commitment of the University of Melbourne to foster, support and showcase the wealth of knowledge of Indigenous peoples. While I regret that we are unable to convene in person, I do feel very enthusiastic that this year's oration will be able to reach a wider audience than ever online. What has been so special about this event over the last decade is the range of First Nations orators from diverse backgrounds of knowledge from many parts of Australia and the wider world. Last year's oration, for example, was delivered by Hawaiian language expert, Associate Professor Larry Kamura, in what was my first NARM oration as Vice-Chancellor. I am delighted that the 2020 NARM oration will be delivered by one of our own Indigenous colleagues at the University of Melbourne, Associate Professor Michael Sean Fletcher. I have had the privilege of listening to Michael Sean speak at a number of events. His knowledge of Indigenous perspectives on maintaining and nurturing our natural environment is deeply impressive and can contribute much to a timely discussion when we have an environment facing existential threat. I would also like to acknowledge another Indigenous colleague, Professor Marcia Langton, for her great contribution to promoting Indigenous knowledge both at this university and at the national level. Thank you, Marcia. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2020 NARM oration.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor Maskell. I would now like to introduce Associate Provost of the University of Melbourne, Professor Marcia Langton, Redmond Barry Distinguished Professor, and since 2000, the Foundation Chair of Australian Indigenous Studies at the University of Melbourne. As an anthropologist and geographer, Professor Langton has made a significant contribution to government and non-government policy, as well as to Indigenous studies at 3 universities, and in 2016 was honoured as a University of Melbourne Redmond Barry Distinguished Professor. She was appointed as the first Associate Provost at the University of Melbourne in 2017. I was 17 years old when Professor Marcia Langton helped me find my path to the University of Melbourne. Nearly 20 years ago, I remember running into her on my way to class. Head down, bum up, she told me. There is still so much work to do. It's my great pleasure to ask her now to introduce tonight's speaker, Associate Professor Michael Sean Fletcher.
Australia is in the midst of both environmental and social crises. The catastrophic bushfires of the 2019-2020 Australian summer inflicted widespread death and destruction. The season began early when bushfires swept through parts of southern Queensland in September, early in spring of 2019. Over the entire bushfire season, 33 people lost their lives and more than 17 million hectares of land was destroyed. Conservative estimates, based on New South Wales and Victoria only, project losses of over 1 billion mammals, birds and reptiles combined. This excludes insects, the loss of which has been reported to be in the hundreds of billions. In the 2020 NARM oration, Associate Professor Michael Sean Fletcher will argue that many of Australia's current environmental problems can be traced to the impact of British invasion and the ensuing violent and devastating effects this has had on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Associate Professor Fletcher will demonstrate how Aboriginal knowledges and ways can play a critical role in arresting the ecological unravelling of the Australian continent, while simultaneously helping to address the social and health issues that impact many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Associate Professor Michael Sean Fletcher is a descendant of the Wiradjuri people and a geographer interested in the long-term interactions between humans, climate, disturbance, vegetation and landscapes in the Southern Hemisphere, with a particular emphasis on how Indigenous burning has shaped the Australian landscape. Associate Professor Fletcher is Assistant Dean Indigenous in the Faculty of Science at the University of Melbourne, a panel member of the Australian Research Council College of Experts, and was recently appointed Director of Research Capability at the Melbourne Indigenous Knowledge Institute, which was established last year and will advance research and education in Indigenous knowledge systems. He joins us now to speak on Our Country, Our Way, how Indigenous people and knowledge can save Australia's environmental and social unravelling. Welcome, Associate Professor Michael Sean Fletcher.
Hi everyone, my name's Michael. I'm a Wiradjuri man, currently on Wurundjeri country. I want to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And also acknowledge that I've was born and lived and grown up on Boon Wurrung country, and I've crossed over Birrarung today to deliver this Naarm oration. I want to touch a little bit about my journey toward where I am today. As a kid, I grew up in the city, but I was always interested in country. I was always out in the bush a lot, always getting into trouble out in the scrub, doing things that kids do. But I always found a sense of belonging out in the bush, out on country. And I remember when I had an awakening, when I realised what it meant to be an Aboriginal kid. I remember thinking for the first time, wow, okay, I'm an Aboriginal person. I'm different than the people around me. And I remember confiding in some friends at the time, and then was subjected, I guess, to a decade roughly of systematic racism and bullying by my friends in school who, I'm not sure if they knew better or not, or whether that's just the pecking order, the Lord of the Flies kind of situation. But I remember that deeply shaping who I was and my relationship with others and the world around us. And that continued into late high school, from early primary school to late high school, until I guess outgrew my peers and people became a little bit too scared to pick on me. But that sense of belonging to country has shaped me in one way or another throughout my life. And so has that relationship with other people and my position because of who I am. And the narratives that you see constantly in society about Aboriginal people in Australia, which are unfortunately overwhelmingly negative, I feel. And that pervades in all sorts of ways. And I think that a lot of Aboriginal people in Australia today can sympathise with the feeling of being outcast in your own country. And I think that narrative pervades all of Australia and modern Australia today, in modern Australia's relationship with country and modern Australia's relationship with Indigenous people or the original custodians of this country. As a kid, I did what a lot of Aboriginal people do. I found solace and I found respect in my community by playing football, and I became quite good at football. I played senior football, suburban football for almost 25 years, achieved great heights in the context of suburban footy, and that gave me a respect. It was a place where I could find camaraderie with the people, with my friends, and with the people around me that ignored how different I was. And I grew up in Melbourne's White Belt, if you like, in the Bayside, a very, very monocultural place. And it was a really great opportunity for me, and it gave me a lot of comfort being able to interact and engage with people around sport. And I think this is where sport's a wonderful thing in Australia, and I think a lot of Aboriginal people in Australia have the same experience, where for a period of time their Aboriginality is forgot, their difference is forgot, their otherness is forgotten, and we become one. And that's a place that I think we need to become more generally across society. And it's something that that drives me in my research, in connecting people, not only us, Aboriginal people, to country, but all of Australia to country. And that's kind of the narrative I want to take through my NARM oration. Professionally or academically, I'm a geographer. In particular, I focus on the patterns and processes that shape the world around us. So I'm a physical geographer. And my main unit of observation, or my main unit of study, is time. So I look into time, I extract sediment cores, I look at the layers of the earth, and I unpack the information that are stored in the layers of the earth to tell a story about how landscapes and environments have changed. And I've done this right across the Southern Hemisphere. And one of my key focuses is how do people shape, create, maintain, and manage landscapes through time? And how is the present landscape that we live in shaped and created by human activity? And this is a fundamentally important facet of the world around us. We need to understand the historical sequence of events that have produced the modern landscape if we hope to manage and maintain and live in the country we live in. So my research is guided by those principles in understanding the past to inform what we do in the future. I'm immensely proud to have been invited to give this year's NARM oration. I'm following in the footsteps of some people that I greatly admire, Aunty Marcia Langton, Uncle Stan Grant, and a host of key Indigenous figures from around the world. And I really feel quite humbled to have been asked to present today's NARM oration, this year's NARM oration. The topic for my NARM oration is Our Country, Our Way. How can Indigenous people and knowledge save Australia's environmental and social unravelling? So Australia faces a number of environmental crises right now. We have the fastest rate of biodiversity loss on Earth. Species have been going extinct in this continent since the late 1700s. And that's accelerating through time because of a range of factors, some of which I hope to unpack for you in this oration. We also are experiencing, particularly in the southeast, but all over the country, an accelerating rate of catastrophic bushfires. Catastrophic bushfires are becoming more frequent, more intense, and larger. And we experience this in a very, very serious way in the 2019-2020 catastrophic bushfires that are now embedded deeply in the psyche of all Australians. We're also facing a range of social problems. Now, while there are many, many, many excellent examples and strong, inspiring examples of Indigenous communities connecting to country, functioning extremely well despite everything that's been thrown at them, Aboriginal people are still among the most disadvantaged and disaffected in this country. So much so that we have this initiative called Closing the Gap, which is born from the recognition that our people, Aboriginal people, are and have been systematically disadvantaged in this country since the British invasion to the present day. But I would argue that there's also a large social problem with broader modern Australia. I feel like we are constantly traumatised by things like catastrophic bushfires, by environmental tragedies like the loss of the Great Barrier Reef, mass deaths of fish in the Murray-Darling system. All of these problems are scarring us emotionally and scarring us as a society. And I'd argue that these are born from an inability to reconcile, modern Australia's inability to reconcile itself with where it rests, the country that it rests on. So how do we get here? Well, it's my contention that the environmental problems that Australia faces today, many of them can be traced to the devastating and continuing effects of the British invasion and subsequent colonisation of the Australian continent. So I want to take us back to basics. Now I want to focus mainly on fire and cultural burning, because that's the main area in which I research. But not only that, fire has been immensely important for humans, for our species. And we are all one species. We are different cultures, we operate differently, we do things differently in different places, but we need to remember we are all one species. So fire was first used by humans, or our progenitors, Australopithecines, 1.7 million years ago. And the evolutionary trajectory of humans, or hominids, is inextricably linked to fire. It has been our main tool, and still is our main tool, for landscape management. It is so fundamentally important for humanity that it essentially underpins everything that we see around us today, through our mastery of fire to the degree at which it fuels a combustion engine and it fuels our energy society. That's all the mastery of fire. But it's not one way. It's not human dominion over this natural element, fire. Fire has been critical in shaping who we are. It's unlocked the food potential of our food to power this immensely energy-demanding organ that defines Homo sapiens. And Homo sapiens evolved around 200,000 years ago, already from a line of expert fire hominids. The ability to unlock the food potential using fire, cooking food, has powered our brain. But it's also powered the use of our brain. It's enabled us to extend our waking hours beyond the rhythm of day and night, sitting around a campfire, conversing, talking in abstract terms, planning, all of these sorts of things that fire has enabled, has catalysed our brain and allowed us to use it in the way that we use it today. And it's also changed many parts of our physiology in the requirements of our body to procure food, move around landscapes, control landscapes, has influenced our form and structure, from our body structure to our teeth. We are a fire organism. We are the fire organism. So if we think about that, and we think about the arrival of modern humans, Homo sapiens, into Australia at least 65 to 68,000 years ago, expert users of fire. Fire had been used for the preceding 1.6 million years or 1.5 million years. We have expert fire users arriving into a continent in which fire was a completely natural process. The evolution of the eucalypts millions and millions of years ago is linked to fire. There was fire on this continent. People arrive being fire users, intelligently using fire in the landscape. And then we have the subsequent 68,000 years at least of people living in Australia using fire to manage country. So what is it? What does it mean to manage landscapes? What does it mean to manage country? Why do people manage country? Well, landscape management is designed around three key purposes. It's to create a predictable, bountiful, and safe environment around us. They're the guiding principles of any kind of landscape management: to create predictability in the landscape, to create resources or resource availability in a landscape, and to provide a secure place to live. This is a ubiquitous thing across humans. And the main tool of almost every culture on Earth, and it actually seems quite odd that Europeans have kind of stepped away from this, in the Americas, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, across Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Indigenous people have and still do use fire to manage country. They use fire in a sophisticated way to create a predictable, safe, and bountiful environment. So this 68,000 years of habitation, of existence on country in Australia, through massive changes in climate, through massive changes in environment, through an ice age, out of an ice age, 10,000 years under the current broad climate regime, right up until the present day, or right up until the present day, has seen the accumulation of knowledge and the passing on of that knowledge through nearly 3,000 generations of people through to the present day of how to live on country, how to act on country, and how to perform cultural obligations on country. And this scientific knowledge, okay, and this is all knowledge that's gathered scientifically. Indigenous knowledge is science. It's gained by observation, executing a plan, observation, refining your plan, executing a plan, observation. This is science. This accumulated knowledge of 68,000 years, more than nearly 3,000 generations of people, has seen the passing on of how to live on country. And so powerful is this form of communication and this form of knowledge transfer that there are still mob that I talk to in southwest WA, in their dreaming stories, have stories that directly link back to the last ice age about country. Same for mob in Melbourne. They have dreaming stories that link back to the last ice age, to the way the landscape was in the last ice age. Mob I've talked to in the top end have dreaming stories that tie in to sea level change. I don't know of any written form of knowledge that can pass on knowledge and ideas for such a long period of time. Okay? The last ice age was 21,000 years ago, and there is still that knowledge residing in traditional knowledge systems in Australia today. This is a profound knowledge transfer, a profoundly important body of knowledge for how to live on country in Australia. Yet this knowledge faces a challenge. Okay, this knowledge of how to live on country faces challenges. It's a challenge to the very fabric of who we are as people. Now this challenge, you might assume this challenge comes from, the overtly racist, the deniers, the history revisionists, those who seek to and cannot recognise the humanity or that Aboriginal people are humans. And that's true. There is a challenge from that sector of society. But the challenge comes from both sides. And perhaps more insidiously from those who purport and espouse an empathy for Aboriginal culture and the impact that the British invasion has had on us. And I'm referring to the wilderness/conservation movement. So if we think about what wilderness is, what this concept, what this construct is, it's an idea that is born from a European ideology, a European epistemology, and it means an uncultivated, uninhabited, and inhospitable region. Or, it's in legal documents around the world, it's variously referred to in terms like this, an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by humans, or man, in this document in the US, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain, affected primarily by the forces of nature, with the imprint of man's work substantially unnoticeable. So this is the etymology of the word, the wilderness. It means in the absence of people, a landscape that operates in the absence of people. And this idea is deeply embedded in some sectors of the conservation movement, and obviously in the wilderness movement. And it's received a number of challenges. And I'll show you shortly in a slide one of the greatest challenges to this idea. This concept of wilderness, despite the challenges, is alive and well. And in studies more recently, 2018 in Nature, an attempt by a set of Western scientists, no Indigenous people in this paper, of scientists who cannot let go for a various array of reasons, I imagine, to this notion of wilderness, have sought to provide a scientific or a technical definition of what wilderness is. And they've come up with indicators, if you like, of what human pressures are. So these are the degree of built environment, the degree of cropland, degree of pasture, population density, nighttime lights, railways, major roadways and navigable waterways. These are a very culturally biased set of rules about what humanity is or what humans do. It's rooted in the idea that to be human, you must have a built environment, you must have large croplands, you must have high population density, nighttime lights, all of these sorts of things. It ignores the fact that people live on country, influence country, and influence environments in all sorts of ways that don't include these very discrete and narrow set of factors. And then, in an act of abject hypocrisy in this paper, and a complete insult to all Indigenous people, they finish by saying wilderness regions are home to some of the most politically and economically marginalised Indigenous communities on Earth. So they're saying that wilderness, this thing that exists in the absence of human pressure and activity, is our home. We aren't human. We don't qualify as human in this paradigm, in this ideology. So I want to take you through a key example of this. In this very august journal, this set of very esteemed scientists have in their wisdom decreed the large parts of the western deserts of Australia, Mardoo country, as wilderness. So if you look at this image in the screen, you can actually see what it means to have this country without humans. In the top panel of the right-hand figure, you can see a 10-year period of fire scars across Mardoo country in which Mardoo people are managing. In the bottom left of the right-hand figure, you can see parts of this country where colonisation was effective in removing people from country, and the area is effectively unmanaged, what these scientists might call a wilderness. On the right-hand side of those figures, you can see some metrics. You can see in Mardoo country, there are infinitely more fires that are a fraction of the size of the fires in unmanaged country. And more importantly, or as important, diversity, ecological diversity, the very thing that these scientists defining wilderness are trying to preserve, is almost double in Mardoo country. Country is more diverse when people are managing it. When people are on country, managing country. This is not a wilderness. This is people's country, and it is healthier when people are practicing their culture and managing country. If we lock people out, which some sectors of the wilderness and conservation movement seek to do, you destroy country. You destroy the very biodiversity that is wrapped around nearly 68,000 years of management of country. This is what happens when you lock people out. This ideology of wilderness destroys country. in Australia. I think one of the most troubling or most pervasive manifestations of this wilderness myth can be seen in the later workings of David Attenborough. Now, I watch David Attenborough with my kids. I think he and his team over decades have been so important in illuminating the world to the wonders of the world around us. Absolutely amazing. And we owe David Attenborough so much for this. But increasingly, over the last few years, maybe a bit longer, his narrative is one in which all human activity is equated with negative impacts. Not one David Attenborough documentary that I've seen in recent times, or maybe at all, has discussed the critical role that people have in managing environments and maintaining biodiversity. Almost every reference to humans is one of negative impact. And that's born from the fact that some cultures on this earth do destroy environments through their cultural practice. But that ignores the vast majority of cultures on earth who have been living in and managing and maintaining highly biodiverse country and sustainable ways of living for thousands upon thousands of years, from the Amazon through to North America, through to Africa, Southeast Asia, Australia, all of these places. It is a fact that if you move people out of these environments, it has a negative impact on the biodiversity of many of them and results in a cascading effect of environmental problems, such as the ones I've highlighted today that are occurring in Australia. So you end up with this irony where the conservation movement or the wilderness movement, and they're not lumping all of them together, not all conservationists adhere to this, and I apologise to those who feel attacked, but a large sector of the conservation wilderness movement, many of them are the same people who espouse the need to shift to more sustainable ways of living. Yet they ignore, consciously or not, the very cultures that can show them the way of how to live sustainably on country, that have accumulated knowledge over generations and generations of how to live appropriately on country. And in many ways, this is dehumanising. It's a failure to recognise that we are humans. And in Australia, this has a deep history. A deep, deep history. Australia was invaded by the British around the same time that Darwin was coming up with his ideas of evolution by natural selection. At the same time, that gave birth to social Darwinism and the notion that peoples across the earth represent different stages on the pathway from apes to humans. And Aboriginal people, and in particular Tasmanian Aboriginal people, were considered the missing link. They weren't human. Okay? They were the kindred of Stone Age men. They weren't attributed humanity. And this notion, this belief, this idea permeated across Australian culture at the time, the British settler consciousness, and is manifest in all kinds of ways in the way that Aboriginal people were treated. Divorced from country, removed from family, shot, killed, all of these sorts of things because they weren't human. And the whole premise of Terra Nullius is based on the fact that Aboriginal people weren't seen as humans. So it's no wonder that modern Australia has trouble understanding the profound influence that Aboriginal people have had on the landscape. But what's the cost? What is the cost, the true cost of the wilderness narrative? Well, I look toward my research and my research on landscape change And there isn't a place that I've worked on where I've gone and taken sediments out of places on country, looked at how the landscape has changed from the pre-invasion period to the post-invasion period, where there hasn't been a massive impact on the landscape. Now, quite obviously, in areas that were deforested and turned over to pasture, turned over to crops, you can see the deforestation signal. And that's an obvious thing to anybody. Right? There are all sorts of problems with that. The introduction of hooved animals, which destroyed the soils that were cultivated by Aboriginal people for millennia, and which give us issues of erosion today and give us issues of salinisation and rising tertiary salts in soils from over irrigation. All of these sorts of things are a product of that. Perhaps less obviously, where people were pulled off country, you see significant changes in the kind of landscape change or landscape that have occurred after the removal of Aboriginal people from country. An example of my work in Tasmania, if we take an example of my work in Tasmania, areas of what is now called the Tarkine, which has become a beacon for the wilderness movement and the conservation of movement about protecting the Tarkine and keeping people out of the Tarkine. If you look at that country, parts of it are rainforest, Gondwanan rainforest, which biogeographically are a link back to millions and millions of years ago when we were joined to South America and Africa and Antarctica, and these Gondwanan rainforests existed across those continents, and they're still reliced across all of those, not Antarctica, but the Gondwanan link is still there in these places today. It links us in the hemisphere. These rainforests are the poster child, if you like, for the wilderness movement, particularly in Tasmania. Let's have a think about what this country was like under Aboriginal management. Up until 1803, just over 200 years ago, Aboriginal people were living in and managing this country. And many parts of the Tarkine, particularly in the far northwest of Tasmania, were described by the first white people who came to this country as open, as grasslands and savanna, or temperate savanna, which is sparse trees over a grassy understory. If you look at the remaining patches of native vegetation today that haven't been turned over to industry, it's rainforest. It's all rainforest. The very rainforest that inspired the wilderness movement in Tasmania. So if we look at the history of these rainforests, and through drilling into trees and understanding when they established, through drilling into the ground and looking at the plant remains below the soil, below these rainforests, we can see that shortly after the British invasion, shortly after the extirpation, the removal of Aboriginal people from Tasmania to the Furneaux Islands and other places, the removal of cultural burning, of management of country by Aboriginal people with fire, there is an explosion of trees across this landscape, an explosion of rainforest across this landscape, jumping out onto Aboriginal country, cultural landscape. This wilderness is less than 200 years old, or around about exactly 200 years old. There are pockets of rainforest that were there under Aboriginal management, and we find trees that date back to when Aboriginal people were managing country, but there is a stepwise exponential increase in tree recruitment following the removal of Aboriginal people from country. And looking at the fossil plant remains in the soil beneath these rainforests, they're full of grass and they're full of gum trees, eucalypts. Whereas now, the soils directly under the forests are full of rainforest remains. This wilderness is a result of pulling people off country. It's not a wilderness at all. So how does that relate to fire? Aboriginal people were managing country right across Australia. In Southeast Australia, Aboriginal people were systematically massacred. Our people were removed from country. We still maintain a strong connection to country, and we're still here. We're still here. But this resulted in a massive disruption to our management of country. And the same things occurred. Shrubs and trees have increased across the landscape and have given us the conditions under which fuel loads are high, so that when climate shifts, when droughts occur, when we have high fire weather or extreme fire weather, the fires are getting larger and larger and hotter and hotter. And the first recorded bushfires in Australia occurred in 1850, a couple of decades after the most severe massacres occurred. This is in Southeast Australia. They're at the same time that it takes for shrub and tree fuel loads to increase. So the situation that we're existing in today in Southeast Australia can be directly linked to the massive change in management regime that occurred in Southeast Australia following the removal of people from country. We're also experiencing the fastest rate of biodiversity loss on Earth, which began at the British invasion and has continued apace since then, and now is compounded by the impact of climate change. This is because people are no longer managing country. Just like the Mardoo example, ecosystems are more diverse. Australian ecosystems, which have been existing with Aboriginal management for 68,000 years, are now unravelling, and they continue to unravel. And the notion that people should be extracted from country to allow wilderness to look after itself is destroying this country. We need people back on country. So I've talked about this in country a lot. What is country? Well, country is everything. It includes all living things, people, animals. It embraces seasons, stories, dreaming. Country is both a place of belonging and a way of believing. Country is all around us. We are a part of country. And it's the antithesis, if you like, of the Western academic tradition, which seeks to break down, compartmentalise, understand things in the minutiae, develop rules around understanding how things work, and in the process, fails to see the forest from the trees. Okay? And then you have the situation in which more and more the academy is patting itself on the back for interdisciplinary research. So following the Enlightenment ideals of the scientific revolution, of breaking things down to its tiny components and understanding each tiny bit, it's now considering itself enlightened because it's starting to try and connect those dots together again, but still in a very much a siloed manner. So it's trying to drag itself out of the darkness cast by the very enlightenment that it was born from. So more and more, the academy, academic pursuit is realising that disciplines are arbitrary. They're arbitrary constructs. Science and art are arbitrary constructs. But this is something that Aboriginal people, Aboriginal knowledge, Indigenous knowledge in Australia, globally, is acutely aware of. You can't separate people from country. Our art is embedded in our science, our understanding, our belief, our dreaming, our practices. Everything is connected. I'm reminded of a book I read by E.O. Wilson called Consilience, where through his identification of sentience in ant colonies, through his long-term observation of presumably non-sentient ants, he came to the conclusion that uniting sciences with humanities might be a sustainable and responsible pathway forward for humanity. Once again, another white man reinventing what Indigenous cultures have done for millennia, and which no doubt his pre-Enlightenment pagan ancestry also knew. So I think there's some unlearning and learning that needs to occur. And I'm a product, intellectually, of the Academy, and I love knowledge, and I love understanding things in the smallest degree. I love understanding things. But we always have to see the connections. We can't ignore the connections. We can't ignore the linkages. We can't silo things away. This is really obvious in the notion of caring for country that underpins the way that Aboriginal people see their obligation and role in the world around them. It's rooted in the notion of healthy country, healthy people. We understand that if we care, look after, and fulfil our obligations and responsibilities in our country, that we benefit and country benefits, and we are both healthy. The net result of caring for country is, as I've displayed, and which there are countless examples in the academic literature, but not only in the academic literature. Go out and talk to people on country, and this is what they tell you, is you have a healthier country. That means there's more biodiversity. In terms of fire, there's reduced landscape fuel loads, less connectivity between the ground and the canopy, so you don't get these big catastrophic fires. It's healthy country. That's what healthy country looks like. There is also the impact of connecting to country and what that does for us, our lives and our livelihoods. And I refer you guys to the excellent work by Sue Jackson here, an extremely intelligent and important ally for Aboriginal people in her work, in which she elucidates a whole series of, and I guess the only term I disagree with here, of co-benefits that people get when they're involved in caring and connecting with country, caring for country and connecting with country. These range from improved physical health, improved mental health, increased engagement in education, lower substance abuse, all sorts of positive community outcomes from connecting with country. And it's vital that not only Aboriginal people, but I think importantly, Aboriginal people are allowed to connect with country. And I would argue that a large part of the problems associated, environmental and social, with modern Australia stem from our inability to connect properly with country, with the country we live in. The importation of European ideas, the attempt to convert this country into another place, the inability to embrace and accept where we are and what it means to be on country in Australia, on country in this country. I think this is really obvious in our attitudes towards fire. You look at our fire agencies, they're paramilitary organisations. They're structured around the belief that we can fight and win a war against fire. There are brigades. They're a military organisation in their internal structures. There are containment lines. The whole language and attitude around fire is fighting fire. You're not going to win. Wake up. You need to embrace fire, use fire, get fire on your side, love fire. Fire is integral to the Australian landscape. And the futile attempt to fight it is just creating more and more problems. And the people, humans, who you need to engage are here. We've been here for 68,000 years, if not more. You need to engage with us to help you through this, to help all of us through this, to help heal the country and heal the people, heal the scars that large parts, if not all of Australia, have experienced following the repeated catastrophic bushfires that tear through this country and rip people's lives apart and destroy biodiversity. Get us on board. We're there, and the knowledge is there. So it's futile to sort of segues into solutions. It's futile just to raise problems and not come up with solutions. So what do we need to do? What's the pathway forward? Well, we need to reawaken sleeping knowledge. We need to engage and listen to Aboriginal people and understand that there's a reticence of many Aboriginal people to espouse, engage and talk about the knowledge that they've been passed on. This stems from the brutal way that Aboriginal people across this country were treated when they were ripped off country and put into missions and had culture and language beat out of them. But it didn't work. It's there. It's there in us. Sit down, talk, engage. Allow us on country. The way that this country is split up into private ownership, government land, all of this kind of stuff prevents Aboriginal people from getting on country and performing their cultural obligations and helping us, steering us out of these problems. We need to trust Aboriginal people. This is a big one. When we have a mainstream media who are addicted to, who are parasites on misery, parasites on bad news stories about Aboriginal communities, despite the plethora of good stories out there in Aboriginal communities, the highly functioning Aboriginal communities. The vast majority of us are highly functioning communities. When the media is constantly barraging us with stories of abuse, physical, substance abuse, of dysfunction, it's hard. It's hard for Australia to trust Aboriginal people with something as important as managing landscapes with fire. This narrative's got to stop. The public needs to embrace Aboriginal people and Aboriginal knowledge, and the media has to wake up. And mainstream Australia needs to change its mindset. It needs to cast off antiquated notions of wilderness, antiquated notions that country is better off without people, notions that we can win a war against fire. It's as futile as the war against terror and the war against drugs. You're not going to win. Embrace fire. Use it as a tool. Embed it. We need to know that this country needs fire. I think importantly, we need to educate. We need to educate ourselves and educate our children. Teach them. They're the future. They're the ones who'll steer us out of these problems. Educate them on the way this country needs to be, the way this country can be, and about the people who created this country. That's my oration. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope you're all safe and well wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Your words tonight remind me of the powerful ways in which Indigenous knowledge, in both its traditional and contemporary practices, make the world, shape the world, and can change the world. You bring to life that which I have always known, that fire is not an enemy to be fought, but a part of country to love, a practice to care for so that it may care for us. Your words enliven the depth of time, both its past and future. It reminds us that we are entwined with country as country, and not just on it. To think of children as our future means we must also understand ourselves as the children of country. On behalf of everyone watching, thank you. My thanks also to Professor Marcia Langton, Vice-Chancellor Duncan Maskell, Uncle Dave Wandin, and all those who were part of our opening. Auntie Lorraine Padgham, Professor Bruce Pascoe, Dr. Melita Hogarth, Tariki Onus, Anala Cooper, and Yamaraki Egan. Thank you too to Kiernan Einfield on the Yidaki. To all of you watching, thank you. Thank you for listening. To Associate Professor Fletcher and to country. Thank you for caring for country and in doing so, caring for children and each other. In a year that has revealed our deepest vulnerabilities, we are also faced with the opportunity to reveal our deepest strengths, to care for country as country, to care for each other as caring for ourselves, and to care for children and our future on this earth. To thank you, we leave you with the beautiful music by Yajilia. Yajilia is a Wurrati meaning singer-songwriter and the daughter of Coloured Stone's Bunna Laurie. Yajilia grew up in a musical family that allowed her to develop her creativity and musical expression from a very young age. She was Victoria's Miss NIDOC in 2019 and is both a student and staff member here at the University of Melbourne. Tonight, she performs Bagana, a song written in the Yagala meaning language of the far west coast of South Australia. It translates to call out and rise up. It is a call for unity among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for the troubling times ahead. Enjoy the music and images from past Naarm orations. And remember, we still have so much work to do. I look forward to doing it together. Thank you for joining us.